Welcome to Agatha Christie She Watched, our spoiler-heavy look at the movie and TV adaptations of the mystery genre's greatest writer. I'm Bill Peschel of Peschel Press, publisher of the annotated novels of Agatha Christie, and today we're talking about queen bees, Soho whorehouses, sugar millionaires, and communist infiltration. It's The Secret Adversary from 2015, starring David Walliams and Jessica Raine as Tommy and Tuppence Beresford. But first, let me introduce my partner in marriage, as well as crime of the fictional kind, Teresa Peschel. Hey, Teresa, how you doing today?
Hi, I always love being here with you in the little office under the stairs, even when we have to discuss a true piece of dreck. A terrible movie, absolutely terrible. And by the way, Julius Hersheimer, because it is a demonstration of how fake he was, he's not a sugar millionaire, he's a fake sugar millionaire. It is an artificial sweetener, and it was in yellow packets, but do not confuse that with the yellow stuff, the pink stuff, or the blue stuff, because it is none of the above. It is a magical, made-up artificial sweetener that when Tommy had it in his tea, he said, ugh.
He spat it out because he didn't realize just how powerful sweet it was.
And maybe it was the aftertaste, too. I'm not a big fan of artificial sweeteners, folks. But I do know the difference between yellow stuff, pink stuff, and blue stuff. I do know they are different.
That's right. And this is The Secret Adversary. It was Agatha Christie's second novel, and it introduced Tommy and Tuppence Beresford, who, in the novel, were these recently demobilized veterans of World War I. Tommy was a soldier, and Tuppence, I think, drove an ambulance.
Among other things. She did a wide variety of things for the war effort, like young women of the time did. And it was a lighthearted, not quite comic, but spy thriller, where spies are infiltrating England, and there's going to be a general strike. And oh my God, after all of the tumult and turmoil of the Great War, people were on edge because they didn't know what was going to happen. And anytime there was unrest, you immediately start thinking about bombs falling. And we forget how many bombs did fall, not bombs from the Germans, but terrorist bombs. I mean, there were terrorist bombings in the United States during World War I, and it's just totally forgotten now.
Yeah, and so there was a group of Irish Sinn Féinians, communists, socialists, there were Germans, Bolsheviks from Russia. They were all getting together to organize this general strike that was going to bring down Britain somehow. And Tommy and Tuppence kind of got dragged into this. They were by accident.
Yeah, kind of by accident, because they happened to be in the right place at the right time. They heard a name mentioned, and one thing led to another. We did an annotated version of The Secret Adversary for those of you in the U.S., and we spell out all of the background material because there's just a ton of background material connected with this novel, everything that's forgotten today. And they were broke. Although it is interesting to see that even though Tommy is broke, he still hasn't pawned his tuxedo.
That's right. There are some things too important to pawn.
Yes, they're too important to pawn. But the novel is very much of its time. Agatha published it in 1922 when the Great War was still raw in most people's memories, both on the continent and in England. Tommy and Tuppence, they only starred in 4 novels and a series of short stories, and they aged in real time. They are the only characters she had who did that. When a novel is written with them, it is very much tied to that moment in time. When we first saw this version of The Secret Adversary, it was at the very beginning of the Agatha Project, and I thought, oh my God, this is, I couldn't imagine that they would change the time. I couldn't imagine how that would work. It was terrible. They did such a bad job. But now, with 200 adaptations under my belt, I watched The Secret Adversary a second time, and it was worse than what it was when we first saw it in November of 2020. And the reason why it was worse is because I've now seen 200 adaptations where they played fast and loose with the text, fast and loose with the plot, fast and loose with the date setting, and it worked. This didn't work. Tommy is not a passive lump, and David Walliams played Tommy as a passive lump. From the opening scene, you see not Tommy and Tuppence. You see the worst aspects of Homer Simpson and Marge. You see the worst aspects of Lucy Ricardo and Ricky Ricardo, because in the opening scene, there's Tommy coming down the street. He's a big guy. David Walliams is a big man. A little bit more facial sculpting, and, he could be an action hero. He's got the build for it. He doesn't quite have the face for it, but he's got the build for it. And a good stylist could give him that face. And he's carrying this tiny little box. This big man is carrying this tiny little box, and Tuppence, who has got to be at least 6 inches shorter than he is, if not more.
Easily.
And she is wearing a very nice suit and a very nice hat and gloves and high heels, and she is staggering under the weight of multiple suitcases and bags.
Because they're in Paris trying to catch the train back to Le Havre so they could take the ferry back to England.
And Tommy is going to set himself up as a beekeeper. Just seeing that, it sets you up for Tommy being completely oblivious to his surroundings. And why does Tuppence put up with it? The question always with The Simpsons is, what does Marge see in Homer? And Homer is so much more manly than this Tommy. Homer does things. Homer genuinely loves his wife and his family. I mean, here you can see that Tommy is concerned about the safety and well-being of his son, and sometimes he seems to be concerned about Tuppence, but so much of the time he denigrates her. This isn't the Tommy that Agatha wrote. This isn't the Tuppence that Agatha wrote. They were red hot for each other, and you see them here with twin beds. That was something you only saw in the movies or TV shows. Real couples didn't sleep in twin beds. They just didn't.
Should back up a little bit.
Yes, they
and
reset
do an
this
overview, because this was going to be a 4-part series in which David Walliams would star. He's the executive producer, and they were going to do all 4 novels. Got The Secret Adversary and N or M for season 1, and they were going to do By the Pricking of My Thumbs and Postern of Fate for the second season. Well, they never did the second season. And once we get through this, and we're going to do N or M after this as well.
Because we're gluttons for punishment.
Actually, what we needed to do, because this is early in our process, we didn't know what banner to choose for the art. We didn't know what mugs to choose. It's been a long time, and we were still kind of figuring out how we were going to do this book.
Bill is talking about the Agatha Christie she watched Big Book of Movie Reviews.
Right.
And when we watched these 2 films, we had no idea what we were doing and what we needed for the book. So we had to rewatch these, and they changed the time setting. So you're no longer in demobilization right after the war when everything is at 6s and 7s and nobody knows what's going to happen next. And heck, nobody even knows how they're going to eat from day to day for some people. To setting this in 1951, 1952, as the Cold War is really starting to rev up. And that can be a really interesting time period. Now that I've seen 200 adaptations where they have changed the date setting. I mean, I have seen Murder on the Orient Express done in the year 2000 as a contemporary, and you can make this work by making the right changes. But the scriptwriter, Zinnie Harris, did a terrible job. I don't think she read the novel, or she skimmed the novel, or she skimmed the Wikipedia summary enough to get an idea of what the high points were, and so she used them, but she changed every single character from small amounts to large amounts, but most of all, she changed Tommy and Tuppence. They're passionately in love. They really look out for each other. Tommy acts as a Raine on Tuppence's more ridiculous flights of fantasy, but he's eager to go out there and see what happens. This Tommy was so passive as to almost not be there. He was a hole in the screen around which everything else revolved.
Well, you see that again from the very beginning. They're on the train. Now, to go back to this, now apparently Tommy had his beekeeping operation because he had all those hives set up, and we actually find out later one of the characters actually has a jar of honey from his hive. But they went there to get a particular...
a special queen bee.
Queen bee.
Now, I am not a beekeeper, but I'll tell you, I know enough about beekeeping just from the little bit that I have read that the scriptwriter and the set designers knew nothing about bees. They didn't know anything. After you've sat through nearly 3 hours of this drivel, and then Tommy and Tuppence realize where the mysterious hidden recording is, and he goes into the tool shed. Remember, this is after multiple days of racing around, and he finds the glass jar with the cloth lid on it, and there's his queen bee. The bee is still alive? Really? When apparently he has never gone near this bee? You don't do this? I know this, and I don't raise bees. And if this is supposed to be full of swarms of bees and he gets honey, where the heck were they?
We never saw bees.
You never see a single bee.
You
never see a single bee.
He even opens up one of the cases and pulls out the honeycomb.
And he's not wearing his beekeeper outfit. You don't just do this. The bees don't like it.
Well, and then there was a bit of byplay in the beginning where their son George, and again, this is another difference from the original novel, because the novel takes place when Tommy and Tuppence meet each other after a long separation.
And they are young and single and childless.
Right. Here they've been married long enough to have a son, George.
Who has to be 10.
At least. He's sent off to Eden.
So 10 or 11?
Yeah. It could be even younger. I think maybe as young as 8. They used to send him off to boarding school, get him out of the house as quickly as possible.
The only reason, by the way, George goes to Eton is because Uncle Carter, Major Anthony Carter, pays George's school fees. And this is something that I will say up front, that the sets and design and clothing and everything look fabulous. They look absolutely fabulous. But how on earth, if Tommy and Tuppence are practically at their wits' end for money, he needs a job desperately. They have stacks of unpaid bills with past due notice stamped in red on them. You see this.
And Tuppence keeps telling him, you got to get a job.
You got to get a job. You got to get a job. How is it that they are they're not living in a single wide, folks. They're living in quite a nice house in the country. They have a car. They have bicycles. Tuppence has a gorgeous wardrobe. Tommy has a gorgeous wardrobe. You'll see a lot of their wardrobe as they change suits, as they change clothes. The house is loaded with very nice things, bric-a-brac, and they can afford to buy train tickets to go across England, cross the channel, go to Paris, stay in Paris overnight in a hotel, buy this queen bee, and then come back. How on earth are they paying for all of this when Tommy desperately needs a job and they have stacks of post-due bills, and yet at the same time they are not pawning things and living in a rented room?
It's also on the train. On their way back, they meet Jane Finn.
And she is upset, she is frightened, and Tuppence notices, and Tommy completely discounts everything that is in front of him.
Right, because they talk to her about bees. He shows her the queen bee that's in a jar in this box, and that becomes important because at one point, while their attention is distracted and she's under pressure because she's trying to escape back to England, she has this tape recording.
This is Jane Finn.
This is Jane Finn. They'll have a tape recording that identifies who this Mr. Brown is, who's the leader of this conspiracy. She has to get rid of it, so she puts it inside the box underneath the queen bee jar.
Yes, there's a cardboard insert in the box that holds the jar in place so the queen bee isn't rattled around too much. How she is supposed to breathe in a closed box inside of a jar covered with a piece of muslin is beyond me, because there's not going to be very much air, and there is nothing for her to eat and nothing for her to cling to, not even so much as a leaf. Right. Nothing. She should have been put in that jar with a piece of honeycomb. But nobody on this set knew anything about bees.
And they're on this train. They're waiting to pull out from the train station. And Tuppence is noticing there's this swarthy guy on the platform that's obviously staring at Jane. And Jane is clearly nervous. And she ends up leaving. And she meets some other guy on the car. And then the guy gets on the train and assassinates the guy. And Jane disappears. Tuppence is always noticing something's going on. And Tommy, and I want to emphasize this because it shows you just how annoying Tommy is. He's continually belittling anything she says. And you would think if he was in the war, he would know what gunfire sounds like.
Except he wasn't in the war. Remember, he was on his way to boot camp and was hit by a catering van and apparently spent the war in traction in a hospital. And again, how badly injured was he that he couldn't at least be part of the home guard and do something, anything? And then when Tuppence brings this up later, there's nothing in the newspaper, and he said that's because nothing happened, and she reminds him, we were moved to a different train. They don't move you to a different train, folks, unless there is a reason for doing this, because it's a lot of trouble to move over hundreds of passengers and all their luggage. It is not like uncoupling freight cars. Freight doesn't complain. Passengers do, and the railway is not going to move you from one train to the next unless they have to. And Tommy completely discounts this fact that something happened.
But they're also not just discounting the fact of that, he's discounting Tuppence.
Yes, he is. All the way through. All the way through, he discounts her. And again, you watch this and you think, these are not the Tommy and Tuppence in the books at all, and what on earth does this Tuppence see in him?
So they continue to go on. She continues to press him to find a job, so he goes visits Major Carter, and hoping that, he can find a job for him. And it turns out Carter is now working for MI5, MI6, and it's hush-hush, and there's no place for somebody like Tommy. And the reason why we go through all this is because
later on in the film, Major Carter and several of the other senior people at MI5, Carter knows what an idiot Tommy is. He knows that he is essentially a pipe and slippers man, the kind of man who his purpose is to occupy space.
Yeah, Carter tells him that.
Yes, Carter tells him that, and then later on, Tommy does not shine when he is being interrogated. Suddenly, all of these people at MI5 are amazed at how impressive Tommy was. What? Didn't they listen to their own briefing earlier?
Yeah. But what is the instigation of this is that Tuppence and Tommy, although I guess it was really Tuppence, puts an ad in the paper seeking information about Jane Finn.
And Major Carter is horrified. Yeah. And he says, if you get any kind of information, you have to tell me at once. This is dangerous. Leave it to the professionals. And of course, they don't. You know, constantly throughout this film, you're seeing people who are unable to communicate, people who are unable to follow directions, people who are unable to see what is right under their nose, people who make great leaps of logic, fail badly, and then are not punished for it by the universe, which is what normally does happen.
So they get two responses, and one of them is from our fake sugar millionaire.
Yes, Julius Hirschheimer, who turns out they made him a black millionaire from the United States with fake sugar. Okay, that's fine. But, and you get this at the very end, he's desperate to find Jane Finn because he claims that she is his niece, and she certainly could be his niece because she's got to be 30 years younger. And they look absolutely nothing alike whatsoever. And then you find out that Jane Finn is not his relative. She is his cookie on the side, his bit of sugar on the side. And he is getting divorced. And he doesn't want to lose his sugar millions when he marries the cookie.
That's right.
His sugar cookie.
And, brown sugar cookie.
And I just couldn't. I could see doing the uncle and niece because of the age difference, but in the novel, Julius is looking for his cousin. They are contemporaries.
Yeah.
And no, so Julius has been lying throughout, and for whatever reason, Tommy has decided that he is jealous and suspicious of Julius Hirschheimer for basically no discernible reason except that Julius Hirschheimer is far more of a man than he is and actually listens to Tuppence on occasion.
Yeah. And appreciates her.
And appreciates her intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, clearly appreciates her intelligence. She seems like she's on the ball.
And there's this scene in the Ritz where they're having tea, and Tommy is spilling the tea. You know, he reaches for the cookies, and Julius slaps his hand, like a mother slapping a son's hand.
A 6-year-old who doesn't know how to behave in public.
Yeah, and it's just, again, you get another indication more and more about how the world is treating Tommy, like you said, a 6-year-old boy who doesn't mind his manners.
And Tuppence herself, when someone asks her, how many children do you have? She says, we have one son, and then she looks at Tommy and says, and him. Because Tommy isn't an adult. He has nothing to do with his character in the novel. He even has, and I guess this is an example again, that he is an overgrown 6-year-old, because you see Tommy staggering home in the wee hours of the night after he's been up all night drinking with scum and villainy.
In Soho.
And he's clean shaven. He looks almost as tidy as when he left the house, and he has no 5 o'clock shadow. But he has so little testosterone that he has no facial hair.
Smooth as a baby's bottom.
Smooth as a baby's bottom. No question, no matter what he does.
Yeah.
Or how long it has been since he last felt the kiss of a razor. As smooth as a baby's bottom. Which means, like I said, no testosterone at all. And he's so passive.
So they go off to the
As though he has given up completely on life and just wants to sit in his chair with his pipe and his slippers. And he barely reads the newspaper. He seems to have no clue what's going on.
So they go on to the second assignation, which takes place on a street.
In Soho, yes, because they get the fob watch, which says, to Jane with love from Julius, and some strips of undeveloped negative. And they go to their friend Albert, who is able to develop the film.
Now, Albert in the book was this teenager who they corral as acting as their
General Dog's body and assistant.
General Dog's body. Now he's in the war. He's actually working for MI5, and he's teaching at a boys' school as kind of a cover. So they changed that character substantially.
And that's fine because, film is a different medium, and when you update a lot of things, you want to update a lot of things. So I can much more accepting of this now after 200 films.
Yeah, and he kind of acts as M because he comes up with all these inventions.
No, not M, Q.
Q, I'm sorry.
He acts as
That's
Q.
Right, Q.
He is essentially Q.
From the Bond
but he
series.
must be a cut rate Q because otherwise MI5 would have him working in their own laboratories full time instead of working in a boys' school. They want to keep, as Major Carter says, we want to keep an eye on Albert because we don't want to let talent like that go to waste. But at the same time, they are letting talent like that go to waste. He's not that talented, or they would have him in their own laboratories.
But he's talented enough later. He comes up with a directional device that Tommy and Tuppence attach to the bad guy's car that they can follow with their own little instruments using radio waves, I guess, sonar or radar, to track him.
Oh, yes.
That's pretty advanced.
That is pretty advanced. And all you can say is that maybe the reason why you see MI5 disdaining to use Albert as a full-time person in their labs is because they're almost as incompetent as Tommy.
That's true.
That's the only reason for some of the scenes that you see later on, which is that no matter how competent you think Major Carter is, or Bulldog, who is one of the other MI5 agents, that suddenly they forget everything they've ever learned about Tommy and decide, oh, he really is a man of action and capable and competent, even though there is no evidence to prove it. And all you can think is, these people don't know what they're doing. They certainly have terrible security.
The story then devolves into two parallel stories in which Tommy is investigating a Soho whorehouse, and try saying that fast 3 times, because that's where some of the bad guys are.
That's where some of the bad guys are, and he discovers from the helpful prostitute, Annette, that Jane Finn is being held in the basement, and at the same time, Tuppence is put on a blonde wig, which attracts Tommy very much, as though he has not paid attention to the hot brunette that he lives with for 10 years, not since George was born. So Tuppence puts on the blonde wig and becomes Rita Vandermeer's maid. And Rita really got a makeover in this film. In the novel, she is an adventurous. She is what Tuppence, the real Tuppence, not this cut-rate imitation. Rita Vandermeer is an adventurous. She plays with the big boys at their own game, and she wins. She knows who Mr. Brown is. Here, she is a fading opera star, and apparently she is working with the bad guys, but she doesn't have any control. She doesn't have any power. She doesn't have any mojo to make things go in the way that she thinks that they should. Here she is, it's like she was neutered. She just wasn't the character that she is in the novel.
And the plot itself that they're trying to put forth, it's supposed to be an assassination of the American Secretary of State on a visit to England.
Yes, at the opera. And how... What, he would come backstage after the performance and meet her, and then she would poison him with some kind of leaves. And by the way, the jar of leaves that Tuppence takes a leaf, we never find out what those leaves are.
Yeah.
Now, maybe that's because she gave it to Sir James Peele, and of course he isn't going to have the leaves analyzed.
But at the same time, while Tommy is underneath in the Soho whorehouse with the gangsters, they're talking about one of them, Mr. Brown, shooting somebody. And they're saying, oh, I should do it as well. And, it's either they're going to shoot the Secretary of State, or are they going to poison him? And it turns out to be neither.
Yes, instead it's an insulin injection, and Tommy's magic jar of honey shows up at the right time to give him a massive dose of sugar so he doesn't die of a diabetic coma.
Right.
And, well, okay. And again, there were so many opportunities that were missed in this film where it could have really been something. You can start feeling the tension rev up, and then everybody starts turning stupid.
Yeah, there's a lovely scene while Tommy is underneath. It turns out he adopts an alias because they were waiting for someone, Brenner.
Bernard Drenard. They were waiting for Drenard.
They were waiting for Drenard, who it turns out is a gangster from the north of England coming down with £1,000 to give them. Now, where this fits into the whole plot, I don't know. I don't think they knew.
Yeah, they didn't know. They just needed to have a money man, and they needed to have Tommy pretend to be someone else. But again, he was so passive. None of the gangsters in London have ever met Drennan, but you would think they would recognize
looks like.
Not just what a gangster looks like, but how he behaves, how he acts. He would be confident. He would be more self-contained. He would be tougher. He would be tougher instead of Tommy looking like a marshmallow.
He's literally, you could see on his face, he's acting like he doesn't know where he belongs, and yet they're treating him as if he does.
They're treating him with respect, although he has given them absolutely no reason to respect him. And then you see scenes where he's being threatened, and he is completely and utterly helpless. He is unable to pick up, I'm going to say the word wrong, the straight razor. He's completely unable to pick up the hammer or the straight razor to defend himself. He just sits there waiting to be punished, waiting for the script to punish him again, because that's what the plot demands. And I just couldn't buy it. When we watched this the first time, I thought this is a really bad version. And there were things I really slagged the film on in my initial review, particularly with the change of date and changing the settings. But now 200 adaptations, and I don't have a problem with that anymore because I can see how well done it can be, and it lets you put old wine in new bottles for a new audience. But watching this the second time around, the flaws become even more obvious because it is just so stupid. It was just so stupid how Tommy behaved. There's a scene where he sees one of the gangsters realizes immediately that he's faking and tries to extort money from him. And then it's found out, and the other gangsters kill this particular gangster by strangling him. And Tommy watches this, and then later on, when he sees Tuppence, she says, "What happened? You look terrible." And he says, "Oh, nothing." He should have told her.
Yeah.
He should have told her, if only to say, "These people are so dangerous, we need to back out because I'm concerned about your safety and George's and mine."
Yeah.
And he finally does tell her that George is being threatened if he doesn't steal this mysterious file. And again, we were never given a reason for why they needed the file. It's one of those MacGuffins, and I guess it doesn't matter, except that it felt so stupid. But he watched someone be strangled in front of him, and he doesn't use this opportunity when Tuppence gives him the opening to say, "We need to back off and talk to Carter. This is too dangerous for you." Not even him.
Yeah.
Not even him. And, oh my God. There was just so much wrong. There are moments, you really start going with the flow and start feeling with them. And then they all do something stupid because the plot demands it or because the script turns stupid.
And that's the real frustration of this, because that scene in which the gangster's trying to privately extort Tommy, it was well done.
Beautifully done.
You didn't know what was going to happen next, and it turns on a photograph that Tommy has that the gangster picks up that basically condemns him to being strangled, which is a very nice touch.
And it shows that Tommy can think on his feet, but Tommy only thinks on his feet when it's convenient for the plot. And so you see someone who occasionally is capable, and then he turns back into a lump of overdone mashed potatoes, just sitting there. And what you should have seen, what we did not see in this, and I think it would have saved the movie, and it would have made N or M better, and we would have gotten Past Turn of Fate, and by the pricking of my thumbs, is you should have seen Tommy at the beginning as a lump, and he should have gradually come into himself as a self-confident, capable man. And you never see this. He says several times, "I'm just a man." No, Tommy, you are not a man. You are an overgrown boy. You did not grow into being a man at any point in this film, and how you ever got it up in order to father a child is beyond me.
And even at the very end, when Tuppence is talking about, "I can't wait to do this again," he's still dissing her and just wanting to crawl back into his life.
And
this is the hero.
This is the hero. This is the hero. And you're left with a bad taste in your mouth because he should turn into the hero. This should be... Tuppence doesn't need to grow that much in terms of her personality because she's already smarter than him by miles, but that wouldn't be hard. She's already smarter than him. She's already more observant than him. But he needs to come out of that cocoon, and he doesn't. He doesn't come out of the cocoon, except little peeks here and there because the script demanded it, but his own character didn't support those actions.
Yeah, and that makes it ultimately disappointing. And seeing it
very
again,
disappointing.
it was
Very disappointing. It was
frustrating.
worse the second time around. And again, I am amazed at how little of the actual plot made it in. And there are those moments when you could say, this could have been really good. Yeah. And the script was terrible.
Now, at the same time, though, there are people who do like this. They have expressed they expressed how much they liked it. And I can only say part of it is that it's beautifully shot.
It looks gorgeous.
It all looks great.
It looks absolutely great. You get a wonderful tour of London. You get particularly some of the sections that were bombed out in the Blitz and they're still in ruins. And that would be historically very accurate.
Yeah.
But, again, you're watching this gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous stuff on screen. And I'm thinking, weren't they having rationing still? I think they had rationing until...
Oh, yeah. They had rationing for a lot of years.
For a lot of years, almost until 1960, I think.
Something like that.
Something like that. Certainly they were still in the throes of rationing, and you would never know it. And we have seen this in the Joan Hicksons were very good. The Joan Hickson Marples, also set in the early 50s, were very good for mentioning occasionally the rationing. Even the ITV's Marple, which plays Fast and Loose, sometimes you get a hint of rationing. Not here.
So if you're just seeing it an hour at a time over 3 nights or a week in between, and you're just not paying too much attention to the actual plot mechanisms.
And if you're not familiar with the plot or the characters as they actually are, you may be fine. You may be fine. But if you know the novel and you've seen what can be done, it's just awful.
You can put up with Tommy. I just can't.
And David Walliams can play Manly because we saw him in Dinner for Schmucks, which we saw twice.
Mm-hmm.
You would never know it was the same actor.
See, he played a Swiss national with white hair, but he still has that hulking build, and that's the other thing.
He has an action hero build, a little more weightlifting, a little more push-ups, and my God, he would fill out a pair of tights. He'd look fantastic.
Yeah, and here when he's being bullied by the gangster, who there's a hammer on the table in front of him, and this gangster is shorter and lighter, like 25 pounds lighter than him, and looking up at him.
And does Tommy pick up the hammer? Why, no. Tommy sits there like a frightened 6-year-old, so scared it's all he can do to keep from pissing himself. But even that, you don't get the sensation of fear. You just get the sensation of, I am a lump of mashed potatoes.
Yeah, if I don't act,
nobody will see
me. Yeah, they won't see me.
Yeah, if I don't say anything, if I don't act, nobody will see me. I will disappear.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't have been that way because David Walliams can do better. He can play doofus because he plays a doofus in ITV Marples, The Body in the Library, and he plays a great doofus there. And that doofus character of his was so much more alive and vibrant than this version of Tommy. I really have to fault how he acted, how he was directed, how the script handled him, because he could have done way better. Jessica Raines was fine as Tuppence. A lot of the other actors, they did reasonably well or very well, considering the part that they were forced to play.
Yeah.
But he was terrible.
Yeah.
He was absolutely terrible. And he's the executive producer of this mess. So...
So we're really looking forward to N or M.
Because it's going to be terrible. We're going to take one for the team, folks.
You're going to have to lay in another supply of beer for me.
I'm afraid so. This was a 4-bottle movie for Bill. And
I don't normally do that. But anyway, thank you very much for listening in on us talk about
The Secret Adversary. And like I said, we did an annotated version of The Secret Adversary. So if you want to read it, take a look at our edition because it gives you all of the background behind the novel, everything that made Agatha decide to do what she did. With characters, with setting, with setups, with plot, with motivations.
But it was also essays on conspiracy novels, on the various groups that were behind the background of Secret Adversary, and also how men and women acted after the war, including the shortage of available males for women and what that caused.
Oh, yeah, there's so much going on. And all of that background, it's 100 years ago now, and you just don't have any idea. And one other shameless advertisement, remember, if you go to our website, you can see what our upcoming events are. And we are always happy to talk about Agatha Christie. So if you're in the area and we've got something coming up, come on out and meet us.
And next time, we'll see you at the movies. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Agatha Christie, She Watched, is Teresa Peschel and Bill Peschel, produced by Bill Peschel. New episodes come out every week wherever you stream your content. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can help support us by going to anchor.fm/mystery and leaving a 5-star rating and review, and by helping to spread the word. To advertise on Mystery She Watched, email Peschel at peschelpress.com. All questions and comments can be emailed to Peschel at peschelpress.com. And thank you for listening.